Hello, everyone. We're just going to wait for people to start joining in here, and then we will get going. Um, I'll just keep an eye on the number of participants that are loading in here, and when we get close to our number, I will we'll start things going. Um, so probably in the next couple of minutes, we should be able to start rolling here. Okay, well, we're going to start right now. And as people join, this is being recorded, so this will be sent out to everybody that has joined in the organization, so you can use it for future reference or for people that might have joined or not able to join right now. My name is Darren Lemke. I am the Vice President of UCPBF and a current Board of Director with UCPBA Calgary. With us today is Mr. James Chepyha from Calgary. James is a member of the Institute of Corporate Directors, so he has his ICD designation, and he is gladly given the time to talk about board governance. As we know within our communities that we have a lot of organizations that try to run different aspects within the community, and they have what some people consider a board or an executive committee. And we're sort of going to go through what the difference is in each of these areas. So this is where we're going to start today's in our spring series. And our spring series will have a few more webinars going on, and I'll just touch base on those at the end of it. But for right now, I'm just going to hand it over to James. And James, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Darren. Appreciate that, and thanks for the invite. And this is an area that's a real passion of mine. By way of background, I've been involved in financing companies for my entire career. I like to say I've taken an entrepreneurial approach to it because I set up businesses for financial institutions such as Goldman Sachs and GE Capital, and I've run a foreign bank in the country. And in those journeys, I've also been involved with sitting on boards of both public and private companies. And as Darren mentioned, I did take the time to go through the Institute of Corporate Directors program and start to the journey of getting more engaged with what it means to be a director and what it means to not be. And what I've seen is that there is real issues with respect to understanding and maybe how you look at what is a director and what is an officer. And what I've seen is that there's actually a lot of really bad governance. And so I have actually put together a program that doing through Foresight, which is an accelerator program for early stage companies. And this came out of because I've seen too much of really bad governance and the impact of it. And we see this through day to day in corporates all over the place. So what I'm going to give to you today is just an introduction to this. And we're not going to go through everything, but I would like to I'm going to do something here that I don't normally do, but we are going to do it anyways. And we're going to share with you a discussion about what is governance. So governance, okay, apologies to everybody. There's way too many words on this thing, but the problem is so much of this is rooted in legal and it does require some explanation. So governance is actually defined as regulating the proceedings of an organization. It's to control by rule or subject to restrictions. And I'll get to why we're going to talk about this. So governance is the practice of controlling the behaviors, activities, processes, and practices. And it involves two main functions, directing and controlling. What you're not seeing here is what's not there is doing. So many of the organizations we see um, get confused between what an officer or an executive does with respect to an organization and what a director does. And I think we need to understand that there should be a separation of those two. So when you're in an organization and you're one of the parties that by executive role you're doing something, you're probably on the officer side. What we sometimes get is that we put together these what we call boards of directors, and the boards are actually then become active boards, and then you get a problem because you're actually not regulating, and you can't regulate and do the same at the same time. So let's be clear: there's a separation of these two, and so governance actually refers to structures and systems that you're putting in place that assign the decision-making authorities to somebody. It tells you how those decisions are supposed to be made. It provides oversight so that the policies and plans and programs that the executives put together can actually be reviewed. And remember, the directors actually are representing the stakeholders. In a corporate, they're representing likely the shareholders and other stakeholders in Canada that's broader than just the shareholders, but that stay on the nonprofit side. We are still saying the directors are representing the members, and they're representing them to see that the executives are doing what they're supposed to do and that the performance is being achieved, and they're monitoring that because somebody has to do that on behalf of them. So the basic principles of this, obviously, you have to have, there's the accountability. So somebody's answering for having been assigned those things. You have the leadership and integrity, stewardship, and transparency with respect to how all this performance is taking place. And I'm going to do two last things. So there is actually a framework for this. This will obviously be available to you. You can take a look at it later on. But what it's meant to do is separate out how the decisions are being made, how they're being governed, who's looking at that. And the last element of this that I'm going to just really want to quickly go through, because I do want to get into questions. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the presentation side. The last element of it is, how do you pick your people? Now, this is the one where there is an element of beggars can't be choosers. We're providing our services and capabilities to organizations, and we tend to overdo it. But what we do in a perfect world, where what we'd like to do is think about this from the perspective of, how do you find the best people for the roles that you need to fill? And there's a process which really I push on, is utilizing a skills matrix. And you'll see in this where, why do certain people sit in certain roles? Well, just as they're getting hired, it's because you're capable into these things. And that applies to the directors as well. So if you're looking for people to sit on a board of directors, what we really want to do is say, so what skills do we need represented, whether it's a legal skill or a financial skill? Like if we're going to have auditing being done, then obviously we need to have somebody with a financial capability, or we can't actually fulfill those roles. And what we want to do is make sure that when we're looking at filling these roles, we're looking at it from why certain people should be on there. And I think this is an area where, any individual can be looked at as, do you have expert capabilities? Do you have a working knowledge, or do you have limited knowledge? And I like to say, like in my case, if I was to evaluate myself and say, okay, if it's financial, I'd say probably going to be seen more on the green side. If looking from a legal side, I've done a lot of legal work, but I'm not a lawyer, so I can't be seen as an expert, but I could have a working knowledge. If it comes down to something like technology, then I'm lucky to have joined you today and was able to turn on my computer. So that's actually a benefit. Let's just say we'll work with limited knowledge. So in any event, as a background on this, so where we're going with this is, for our organizations, we need to think about this from separation of the duties and saying, who's sitting as an executive? And then if we're going to have a board of directors, make sure that from that perspective, the board is there to do the governance. I hate board of directors. I prefer board of governors because we're actually governing somebody's behavior and their activities. So think of it from that perspective. Just as an aside, if you have questions, I know we're using the web webinar format, so you can put the Q&A, put your questions in Q&A. That's one way of doing it. It'll be easy for Darren and myself to actually monitor that and provide feedback. So that's the introduction to governance, and maybe we can, Darren, we can start a discussion on that.
Yeah, well, first of all, James, I just want to sort of clear up some things because, like you, myself, I've sat on different organizations, what they called boards, but they're actually more of a working executive committee because there is a differentiation between what a board of directors does and what a working executive does. So can you sort of explain what a pure board of directors would be? And then we'll get into talking about a working executive.
Yeah, see, what the board of directors is, their responsibility is to provide oversight. So if you think about going through a year where, say, well, I have an executive committee, and the executive, the president is actually saying, they establish the direction for where the organization is going to go over the next year. They have a plan. They put that in place. They put the right people in the right seats to execute on that. And then it's not dissimilar. I like to say the CEO of an organization has three major responsibilities: set the direction for the company, put the right people in the right seats, and make sure you don't run out of money. That's not dissimilar whether you're for-profit or not for profit. That's what they're responsible for doing. And what a board of directors is supposed to do is they're supposed to look at this they say, okay, we are agreeing with your plan. Okay, so this is what you've laid out. Hopefully we reach an agreement, and that's what we've agreed. So we're representing the membership, and we're in agreement. Now what we're going to do is you start executing on that plan, and on a regular basis, whether it's quarterly or monthly or however you want to do it, one of the principles we talked about is that transparency and reporting. So you're going to report to the board what you've actually done. Are you on plan? Are you not on plan? Do you have enough money to get through the year? Where are you with respect to that? And when you look at that, the board is there to actually provide oversight in it. Where you can get into real problems is if the board of directors becomes the doers of it, then there's an inherent conflict, because now who's actually providing oversight? You've mixed the roles. And so what in a perfect world you would do is you would have the doers and the overseers of it. And that's the separation of duties that takes place. Hopefully that answered the question in a long-winded way.
So I have a question here. In our local Ukrainian Canadian organization, our bylaws state that the executive committee is drawn from the board of directors. So I am a member of the executive committee as well as a board of director. Is that typical or atypical? Is there a discrepancy between nonprofit and business in this regard?
Yeah, there are discrepancies in this. And that's so, it's a great question, Michael, because, I know what you're getting at. And I know that what you're doing is you're fulfilling what the bylaws actually said. Now, the question that you have to think about is that actually the right way of doing it? I know that's what we've been doing, but just because we continue to do in the past, is that what we should be doing? And then if this is the case, so if that's the approach where you actually said the executive is coming out of those that are on the board, okay. Now, you can't provide oversight. Like if I'm writing the checks and I'm an officer of this organization, how can I actually provide oversight? So if you think about corporations, let's go to a corporation perspective. You will have the CEO. The CEO is often on the board of directors and represents, and so they're the one person. So the CEO is also the employee of the board. So that's the one person the board is actually hiring. Now, the board is providing oversight of the CEO, and the CEO is actually executing, they're setting the direction. I like to use the analogy of a ship's captain. So if you think about this, a ship's captain plots a course, they make sure you have the right people doing the right things on the ship. So I got an engineer, I've got everybody that I need to do, and I make sure I have enough fuel in the tank to get me to my destination. Okay. Now, if the ship's captain is messing around in the engine room, who's negotiating and directing the ship? And this is where we see things going on. That's why there has to be the job of the CEO. And it's kind of funny. I was doing a presentation and I asked the audience, and it was filled with people that had multiple business degrees. And I said, has anybody been in a class in university where somebody actually told them what a CEO does? And they all looked at each other and going, like, there's a fundamental problem going on here. So let's just take it as a given that you got to at least do that. What I'm having as challenges is if everybody is both on the management, on the executive committee, and on the board, then there is no oversight. There's nobody representing, looking at, are they behaving appropriately? Are they following the rules? So I don't I see what you're saying about the bylaws, and this is what we're supposed to do, but I don't think you can actually effectively do both jobs.
So that brings me with UCPBA Calgary, for example, we had an executive, and every executive they had the president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and then other members. But we also had a 4-person independent board that the president and treasurer would then report to at the end of the fiscal year. And we also had an audit committee separate of the treasurer that would then review the treasurer's work and bring that back. So that would be sort of a board working committee type of structure, where I've sat on other organizations where there was no overseeing everybody, whether you're the president, vice president, treasurer, whatever, you were full in on everything.
Right. And yes, on boards, if you have sufficient capabilities, you will have multiple committees. So one of the committees of the board is an audit committee. And the audit committee is there to review what was done on the financials and provide oversight and to provide the report back to the members. Whether it's shareholders or whether it's members of their organization, I'll look at it as being one and the same. So that audit committee is there to provide that independent, second sober thought that you said you were going to spend the money this way. We've looked at it, and we looked where you spent it, and we did our audit. We did all the proper procedures to make sure that took place. We did our sampling. Now, we didn't do everything, but what we did do is make sure that based on our audit, you followed the rules that were established by the bylaws of your organization. Got it. That makes sense.
So when I go back to thinking about some of the organizations that I've sat on within the community, it's hard to attract some people that have any experience. So we attract a lot of people that don't have the experience, but they want to help out in any way. So this is something that I'm going to ask everybody that's on here. If you had something that would guide you on, say, how to open a meeting correctly, how do you make a motion, how to pass a motion, how to terminate a meeting, would that be something that is that would appeal to a lot of people on here? So you can either type your answers in, and that, because we could go through that, because there's a lot that goes into it, because It's for one thing, it's how to start. I guess, James, I'm going to get you sort of just maybe to go through a quick little scenario on how would you start a meeting and say you were going to make a motion to pass the motion all the way to why you terminate a meeting as opposed to adjourn a meeting.
Okay. Well, okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you something. This may be hard to see, so let's put this in front. So here's Robert's Rules of Order. This is a beast. These are the rules that govern these meetings. Okay. You can actually, sorry, I just dropped the other one. You can go on Amazon, and Amazon, you can also get these quick studies of Robert's Rules of Order. And this is like a little, how many page? 6-page laminated book available on Amazon. And it gives you actually all the rules about starting a meeting, ending a meeting, how you do with nominations. It's actually like, this is all, the Robert's Rules of Order outlines those things. And that's what's supposed to govern how we do this. It is actually, it's the way that these things have to get done. Now, I don't think we have to get into too much of those rules right at this point. We can actually go through that at a separate one where we go through. We could actually do a practice one. But what is really important to understand is the role, what each party's roles and responsibilities are. So by separating this out, and I think if you look at the bylaws, they'll actually guide you on certain elements of this. But when you call a meeting, there is the formal portion of this where you're actually saying, I'm calling a board meeting because I need certain things to be moved and approved. There is, if you're talking about meetings of just the executive committee, that's separate. Now, you still can run them according to Robert's Rules of Order, but what you're looking at is, what do you need to approve? Like, the board has to approve the financial statements, right? So that's one of the things that they're going to look at and go through. So you will actually make a motion. So that'll be tabled. You will call a meeting. The purpose of the meeting you've outlined is, here's the agenda. One of those elements probably is going to be approving financial statements. So that information, now it's up to the executive to make sure that the information is provided to the board so the board can actually make those decisions. And you know, there's rules as to when the information is supposed to be provided, and you've seen this, like for calling AGMs and so forth. Like, there's a standard that you have to follow, otherwise it's not going to be. Do you have quorum? Have you given a proper notice of the meeting taking place? Those things. What we see people doing really wrong in certain elements of this thing is you even things like minuting the meetings. Now, not when you're taking minutes of the meeting, this is not transcribing everything that's said during the meeting. You're only putting into those minutes the things that have to be tabled and approved by the board, and not everything is that. So when I'm looking at this, we sometimes are making too much out of what we're supposed to be doing, and it makes it seem a little bit onerous. So what I'm saying is, what's going wrong is that, and I think right at the beginning, so one of the things that I see not happening with organizations is that at the beginning, we do not sit down and say, let's bring the executive and the board together and understand what the roles and responsibilities are of each. Before we do anything, let's make sure that we're on the same page. There's a saying with respect to the board. So a good board member is supposed to be noses in, fingers out. Okay. So you're supposed to be sticking your nose in what's going on, but you're not supposed to be doing. Your fingers stay out. It's the responsibility of the management team to manage and execute. This is that the trouble that I think we're having is, you know, our understanding of what roles of each, if that makes sense.
So a lot of organizations don't have that board overseeing. So they have the president, their vice president, secretary, treasurer, which is the executives, which usually have the signing authority within the organization. And then they have other members, whether they assign them a designation or just a member at large. So with no oversight, how does that differ in the aspect?
So, and you can get away with that because depending on your bylaws, you may not need to have that. The question then, and that's when we can really run into problems, because who is looking at what's actually being done? The members can't all go in and start looking around and they don't, that's not their job. So if we're not set up appropriately to start, I like to say, if you're not set up to succeed, by default, you're set up to fail. You just may not know it yet. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But why I started with those quick pages on governance isn't because I like what Oxford has to say about this, but it's to understand that there is that separation of the responsibility. And then, it doesn't really matter if you're following the proper minutes and so forth thing, if you don't know what each party is supposed to be doing. Do we have any questions?
I have a question here from Gloria. What if a board of director or the CEO or chair ignore the recommendations of their internal audit committee? The audit committee is not on the board.
Well, see, the audit committee is actually supposed to be a committee of the board. Okay. So right there, you've got a problem on the setup. The board of directors is supposed to be responsible for completing the audit. And, when you look at a board, the one committee that just is not even in question, that is going to be there. You may have membership, or you may have all sorts of different committees responsible for HR or whatever it happens to be. But the one committee is the audit committee. And on the audit committee is supposed to be somebody that has a financial background. And, UCPBA, I think they were doing a very good job on that.
Mm-hmm.
There was that separation. Because I remember going in and having to look at things. So that's fine. It's there. I'm not suggesting that it has to be perfect, but Gloria, there should be the audit one. If they're ignoring what the audit committee is saying, that's a problem. Because the audit committee, if you look at it, the board of directors, like the audit committee, provides a report to the members. They're not providing it to management. They're not providing it. It's to the members that they have reviewed the financial statement, and the financial statements have been done according to the plans, and they're all in good shape. And if management is ignoring what the audit committee is saying, if I was on the committee, I'd personally have a problem.
And that's usually the audit committee and everything is you're presented the financials to present to the members at your AGM, correct? That's the usual course of how things go. Okay.
Right.
I just want to touch on, go ahead, James.
No, go ahead.
Just one thing. So on some of the boards, when I first started sitting on them and they were run by different people would say, let's adjourn the meeting. And some people would say, let's terminate the meeting. Can you go just into that little difference between the two words?
That one I'm going to leave with you. I'm putting that back at you. That's a technicality.
Yeah.
And, and the thing is, even like Robert's rules actually defines exactly how you adjourn, and so that meetings can be adjourned, and there's a number of different ways that it can be adjourned. It can be adjourned if you've just completed the meeting. So everything on the agenda is done, meeting's adjourned, move on. It can be adjourned because of an emergency. So something's actually happening that's requiring it to be adjourned. There can be adjourned, so it can be adjourned because of time. So if you have not completed the meeting, but you have, and this is actually one that I kind of like, because otherwise meetings can go on for forever. If you've hit the time for the scheduled meeting can be adjourned, even if the stuff that has not been done. And these are all, like, when you look at the Robert's rules, they define the adjournment, and terminating is a new one for me. I have not. I'll leave that one with you. Have you heard the term? It's been terminated?
Yes, and this was brought to me up by one formal board I sat on. Is termination meeting basically stands that everything that on the agenda for that meeting was covered, and it is terminated and cannot be revisited unless it was a motion was tabled to revisit something on the agenda.
Yeah, but if you look at Robert's Rules of Order, it's kind of funny because they don't actually use the word terminate. It's only adjourned. So, and these are, I'm not going to get hung up on the technicalities of it.
Yeah. So it's
The
like
bigger,
Ford and Chevy.
yeah, the bigger thing is, the bigger issues we've got is making sure that we understand what role we're supposed to be playing and why we're playing it. That is a fundamental issue that, and I don't think we're doing a really, and I'm not suggesting that non-for-profits are any different than for-profits, because I think for-profits get the same issues. I don't think that the governance is actually being done appropriately and looking at what you are supposed to be doing. And that can happen for a whole bunch of reasons. It could happen because you've got a CEO or a president that has got such a strong personality that there's no, the directors don't push back. Those are dynamics that are fundamental that you need to look at. One of the things that, if you think about on proper board formation, is to make sure that there is turnover in the management and the board, but it's done in such a way as that there's still organizational history and memory. Because there's things that we've all seen this. There's history as to why certain things happen and why they were done. If you turn everybody over, you lose that. So what you don't want to set yourself up for is a situation where everybody's gone, everybody new comes in, and they have no idea what's happened in the past or why. For good or for better or worse, that is a real problem. What I like to do is think about it from, what are we trying to achieve, and then, getting the appropriate skills in each of those seats to be able to be effective. So,
And I think, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
So just Alex just said that every item that has been decided at a board level can be revisited.
Yeah, there's nothing stopping any of that to come back, because, but it's what can't, like, I'd like to say, what we're not suggesting here is that, I guess, we don't want to have situations where there's nobody looking over the shoulder of what is being done and being able to provide that sober second thought. That's the role of the board.
I have a question here on the topic of turnover. Can you highlight the importance of board member performance reviews? How can someone on a board be asked to step down otherwise?
So that is a fantastic question. So when I'm looking at an organization, sitting on a board is not, you're not appointed for life. That's not the point. why I put up that skills matrix is because if you think about this, so you're at a certain point in an organization's life, and you've decided, the management has decided, we're going to go from here to here. So I need certain skills. What I'm going to do is, you can actually have term limits for board members, which is one way of doing it. You can actually have it so that when you join, it is a clear understanding that you are not sitting here for life. You are here to fulfill a very specific role because of your capabilities. And when the organization evolves and it's moving next, what we're going to be doing is putting in a different skill set to enable us to get to the next level. One of the examples that I use is, okay, so the world is going to change. And when we've seen this, we've seen it because of COVID, we've seen all sorts of different things happen. And let me give you an example. So I like to say, Amazon should not exist today. As an organization, Amazon should have been killed by Sears. Sears should have killed it. Sears invented online shopping. So why did this not happen? If you think about the executive and the board of Sears, how could you let this upstart bookseller come in and eat your lunch? It was a total failure in management and the board to understand what you're doing and where you're supposed to be going. And if you think about it, what Sears was doing was, they were selling you what they wanted to sell you based on the fact that they had stores and they could put whatever here's what we put in the stores and this is what we're selling. Amazon came about it from a different approach because it didn't actually have the real estate. So it's looking at it from saying, I don't have to care what I'm carrying. I only care about what you actually want. So my approach to management and the governance of this is, I'm going to sell you whatever you want. So here comes, just turning the exact same thing on its head, they were actually able to put Sears into bankruptcy. This is a failure in governance. This is a failure, definitively a failure in governance. Management is continually doing the exact same thing, expecting a different result. This is the problem in our own organizations. It doesn't matter. So what's the purpose of our organization? What are we here to achieve? And having the proper person in the CEO, in the president's role, say, this is where I'm taking this organization. This is my vision. And the board is supposed to say yes or no, I agree on this vision. And if you don't like the vision and you don't like that person running it, then it's the board's responsibility to say, we need to replace that person. Okay, fine. I know it's volunteer, but let's work on it anyways. So the CEO, the president, the head person operating the organization is saying, I'm going to go from here. This is my vision. This is what we're going to do over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, however long you want to put it. The board approves it and then provides that oversight so that the working in conjunction with management, that you can't see all the risks. You cannot see as an individual. You're not going to see everything that's going to potentially happen. So that board is providing the background and knowledge of what's happened to allow them to make sure that you have less chance of failure as the CEO. When we want to, once we fulfill that, then we say, okay, now it's time to move on. And as a board of directors, those people and those individuals are not sitting, they're sitting there because they're bringing something very specific to the table. And at some point they're going to turn over and we're going to bring somebody else in. And if you know that you're not sitting there for life, I think there's a more interesting chance of saying, I will be interested in committing to this organization to do this specific thing. Long-winded answer, but hopefully we got there, that you're not doing it for life.
Yeah, and the one thing that I know on having we had this on a condo association I sat on once, and in the bylaws that they had something that was considered a rogue board member. If they really went off and were doing damage, that you could actually call a special meeting if you couldn't wait to the annual meeting in order to remove that person.
Yeah. And that can be set up. Like you can actually define in your organization what you will do in these certain circumstances. And those things, I've been part of that, where you have a rogue person and it's a real problem because it's a distraction. And so then the organization is paralyzed while this is all going on. So nothing happens. And the damage can be pretty dramatic because it can lead to the failure of the organization where it's just like, I'm done. We're all done. So, and I was actually approached today by one other organization that they've got that situation. They have to remove 2 directors. So it does happen.
Yeah. And that's usually some of the, so how often would you suggest reviewing bylaws in an organization?
Well, that's a great question. One of the things that's actually important is, does everybody understand what the bylaws are? Have you actually read them when you come in? One of the benefits of, if you do this correctly, when a person joins a board, there is actually a board book. And the board book has all the information that they need to get up to speed. So it has the bylaws. You go through all of these things. It can be done online or however you want to do it. But I think it's important that that's part of normal due diligence. When you're joining, you need to be brought up to speed. And also, as I said, what should happen on an annual basis is that the board and management gets together and understands exactly how those interactions are going to take place. One of the things I've always said is management should never surprise the board. You never, ever, ever want to go into a board meeting and have them surprised as to what's happening. That's just a recipe for disaster.
And a lot of this is covered in different provinces, have different requirements on their registry. Because we're doing this for right across Canada, we have a lot of different provinces involved. And it's the same thing in a treasurer's capacity. A treasurer in Alberta has to be able to reconcile a casino and go through an audit with AGLC, where we might not have that in other provinces.
Right. Yeah, and Alex has stated, like, it really depends on which province you're operating in, which act you're actually under. And the thing is, if it's a corporation, it's whether you're federally incorporated or provincially incorporated. And this goes even further, because what's kind of interesting, if you go to the corporate side of this, there's differences between Canada and the US. In the US, if you look at it, board of directors is responsible to the shareholders. In Canada, a board of directors is responsible to the corporate, not to the shareholders. So there's these fundamental understandings of who are you responsible to? What is it that you're actually doing? So, when you get into that, there is, so we don't really need to get into on the not-for-profit, but like on the for-profit side, you are taking liabilities associated with being a director. And so you do have to operate, you have to understand fiduciary duty and duty of care when you're acting and when you're making these decisions. Because if you don't, then you're not necessarily going to have legal recourse to saying, I have done this appropriately. That gets into things like, and further goes on to ensuring that you have appropriate D&O insurance, directors and officers insurance.
We're actually going to have so this first webinar we're doing right now is part of a series. We're going to do the spring series, and we are going to cover D&O insurance for directors and people that sit on this to protecting. We're going to have an insurance specialist come on and talk about it and why you would have it no matter what your organization is. And we're going to also get into the next one, how to build a strong executive, because one of the biggest things that we hear a lot is, I don't want to be president for the next 10 years. I need somebody to take over for me.
Right.
So how do you groom those executive people? And that's the whole thing, is we have to sort of bring people in sometimes at grassroots and bring them up through it by giving them the skills in that. And so this is part of what this is doing, what we're looking for. So the more feedback we can get from all the organizations that are attending today will help us groom some more of these webinars in order to help your organizations develop stronger executive committees and or board of directors or both.
Right. And the problem here, as you identified, people don't want to sign up for 10 years. And unfortunately, that's too often that's what the case is. And, you know, I know that there's people on this call that have signed up for 10 years or more on being part of organizations. And that's a challenge. And so if we put this in place properly and start thinking about how we're setting this up, creating that, we want to start creating that turnover. And when you look at it, you could say, as you've gone through executive roles, then it makes sense for you to be able to change your hat. Now, the problem that some individuals have is that they do not recognize that they've changed a hat, and they'll stay when they become a director, they still operate as if they're management. That is a problem because, as we said, or as I said earlier, it is as a director that is noses in, fingers out. When you're on the management side, it is fingers in. So this is, if we try and create that structure, I think that would be really helpful. It's hard to do. I'm not suggesting it's easy.
Yeah. So if there's any more questions on this, like I said, we're going to get wanted to do an introduction to our governance because it's talking with a lot of the organizations around where I know people. It's very few have a board of directors. The majority of them are working executives, and the working executives have like who oversees the working executive. And so a lot of people say, well, I'm on a board, but they're really on a working executive. And sort of just wanted to lay out that there are still responsibilities, even if you are a working executive versus just on the board of the organization.
Right. You know, the roles are very separate, and they're separate for a reason. They're meant to do something. And why we get into this problem is if they're all combined, then we're not getting any of the oversight. And that's a fundamental issue. What I want to see happen is a clear understanding of both so that we can actually go to make sure that when an organization is functioning, what you don't want to have happen is no one's provided that oversight and then comes out that we've done something wrong. So it is that sober second thought. I know there's a question in here.
Yep. What is the role of a past president or chair on a board?
Two different things. So the chair of the board is a very specific person. The chair is the one that will actually call. So they work directly hand in hand with the CEO or the president. They're responsible for the communications back and forth. The past president is not, so the past president is not necessarily sitting on the board. Past president is, I don't know what it is. It really depends on your bylaws as to what that thing is. The reason we often have the past president is so that there is a history about what's gone on in the past. There is a problem with past presidents, or there can be a real problem with past presidents, in that if you have a really strong past president, bringing in a new president, you can have this situation where people are following the past president and not the new president. So I know what you're trying to achieve, which is the history. And we want to be able to know why we've done things and provide that. But usually in organizations, you'll see if you're once you're the president and once you're gone from the president, you're typically gone from the organization, because that new president has to be able to set the organization for where they're going. And they do not want that history there. It just can create real problems. The past president, now the past president, if it's, and truly I don't like it, but say that person now becomes elected to the board. Well, now that's a different situation, and they have to make sure that they're playing a board role and not that you're gonna, like, you can see that happening. But the chairman is a key for the board of directors. They are ultimately responsible for all the activities of the board, for setting the meetings together, having the discussions, follow up after there's a board meeting. So one of the things that should happen in this, you will have a board meeting. In a for-profit company, you will have on the board, when you have a meeting, you'll have in-camera sessions where the CEO is not privy to that and allows the board to have their own discussion. The CEO is typically is on the board, but there will be, make sure there's times when they're not in those meetings. In the not-for-profit, separate animal, you will actually but the chairman still has those responsibilities to making sure that the meetings are properly run, they're constituted, and then there's follow-up between, once the boards had their meetings, there's a follow-up with the president.
So does the chair have any authority?
Well, so depends. So that's a loaded one, because they're a voting member of the board. Now, where you can get into situations where they have a different influences, usually you want a board that has an odd number of members, because you need to be able to not have a divided board. So what sometimes does occur is when there is an even number board, you could have the situation where a deciding factor is the chairman. But you'll find how that is governed, because that'll have to be in the bylaws, or how that the mandate of the board will have to govern how that actually works. So but where they do really have a difference is they tend to have more influence because of their roles with the different directors and playing that intermediary between the board and the president or CEO.
So does anybody have any more questions here? We're getting to the top of the hour here. We'll probably have time for one more question if anybody has any. In the meantime, if you have any feedback on anything that you would like to see on this type of series, please send it in to us, and we'll look at doing it. I want to thank our sponsors for the spring series, being the Ukrainian Credit Union and BCU Financial, for sponsoring the series that we're going to have. One of the next ones we're going to have is going to be on how to build a strong executive. We know that this takes time, and you talk to different presidents or different chairs, as they call them. They come in and they want to either stack their own boards with people that they know can get things done, or they have things that's there. So and we just got a question on that, or what's the best way to recruit board members? Well, usually the best way to recruit board members that I found is knowing the people that the skill sets that you want, is really identifying what skill set you're looking for on a board, and seeing if those people have the skill set that they can bring to make your organization stronger. And I always look at the knowledge, attitude equals behavior. If you have the right attitude and you can give them some of the knowledge, you'll get the behavior. So you try and fit those people into like building a puzzle. You find the type of people you want on the board that can help your organization move forward. James, what are your comments on that?
To me, it is look for the strongest person that you could possibly have. If you're, you know, you just want like attracts. So if you're able to get really strong people that like working together, and so you have a strong president, a strong CEO, the what you're able to do is attract strong board members and other people that are actually executing it. What I think is missing personally is willing to take the chance and saying, here's the vision I'm going to have. This is where I'm actually going to go. So create that vision and then, put the right asses in the right seats. Look for those people. Use your skills matrix. Find what you actually need to execute and go after and say, look, I'm not asking for 10 years. I'm asking for this is what I need from you to get this thing done. I think that like it's worked for me. I had Mike Hodge dragged me into one, and I loved working with the people that were around the table. It's absolutely great people. Makes it a lot of fun because we're not getting paid for this on the non-for-profit side. So I think creating that vision, then this is how we're going to execute, and then turn it over to the next. Say, okay, I'm only doing this for this period. So, and then we'll bring in others. And you're right. Like if you bring in people that are playing the support roles, they see it, they start getting excited and they're having fun with it, then they create their next version of this. So.
And last question here is, are there any other books that you could recommend? That question pops up.
Not off the top of my head. There's lots of leadership books out there. I will think about that, and I'll if I find one, you can circulate it, the title, but not off the top of my head. Sorry.
Okay, so I guess with that, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time from wherever you logged in from across Canada. Oh, hope we have one more here. It's important for national and regional organizations to recognize the expertise and vision of people familiar with the intricacies of their local community, especially rural versus urban. And
sure. And I think, by the way, if anybody wants to reach out and discuss any of this, don't hesitate, whether it's on LinkedIn or however you want to do it. Darren, you can circulate email addresses if somebody needs the questions. This is a really super important topic. I'm passionate about governance because it's just so important to the success of an organization. So don't be strangers.
Yeah, and like I said, our whole goal here is to just help strengthen organizations. We know it's hard to find people to sit and do sit on boards, sit on executive committees. A lot of people are just shy or they're not overconfident that they can participate. So the whole thing is how can we make that being a more welcoming experience wherever you're at. And this is one of the main goals is if we can give people confidence and if they have the enthusiasm, then we can help all the organizations grow.
For sure. Thanks everyone for participating. It's been great.
Thank you.
Hopefully it was helpful. Talk to you guys.